Great. We'll log in. When you get to, it will say your chapter. I have the drop down. We will find yours. Someone tell me if they see it. Am I blind?
Psi Beta.
Psi Beta. And I'm sorry, I've been saying that backwards the whole time. So when we log in, all of your pages will look a little bit different. But what you need to do is go down and go into resources, and everyone will have access for this. I'm sorry, it looks different. I got to move that panel out of the way. It should say since you're a chapter officer and have resources, but it looks like it's a little different. So bear with me. I know I have it pulled up in this tab right here. So we'll cheat the system. You go into resources. I selected recruitment. And here are some really important things that will be important to you all. So the bump group and timekeeping. So when we talked about strategy, a big part of you all is not only just in membership selection, but figuring out how to be strategic, and we'll dive into that. Chapter voting tips and tricks. All of you guys will be touching the voting app. So I would challenge all of you get to know the voting app. Are you guys super familiar with it? What's the feel of it as a chapter? Do we love it? Do we hate it? What are your thoughts?
I definitely think that's something that the chapter needs more training with.
Perfect. Okay, so maybe we can do another one with that, but you guys will be working intimately with the voting toolkit because that's where all the comments, that's where will be the rankings and all of that in there. Again, some great things about videos, invitations committee guidebook, that'll be incredibly helpful. The invitations committee is just a little quick fact sheet. And we'll pull those open in just a bit. Some other important things that will be helpful to you all is a legacy policy, particularly on invitations committee, because you all will make that final decision on those legacies, and to know those rules intimately will be important. So you're not up at midnight or calling me or having someone sad crying, or you're not also stuck with someone you don't want because you misunderstood the legacy policy. Some other really great things, again, more with a voting tool, membership guidebook, but all of these will particularly apply to others a little bit more. But all great things. I would highly recommend you check it out. But we'll dive into, and I already have them pulled up. Well, not that one. The invitations committee handbook. So it really lays it all out, but we'll dive into a few of the important things and what they should look like, but also practically. So the best part about having these guidebooks and anything Adultus Data is no one is ever going to expect you to memorize this. There's never a quiz. There's never going to be a pop quiz. No one's ever going to challenge you on any of this, but what I would challenge you all to do is to know it familiar enough to say, hey, I think I read it that one time, I might remember, and to always go back and reference these things. So we'll dive into the first section is all about the invitations committee. So we went through who's a part of that, right? So we have our chapter president, we have the vice president of membership, and then we have the chairwoman, and then one from each class. So what's really important for you all to understand is that you represent your class, and those folks come to you. So whoever our senior is, those are where our seniors, if they have a comment, the question, concern, you're their point of contact, and making sure that you guys really address with the chapter that you're their POC, you're their person they go to. So if all of our sophomores, our group of sophomores have a concern or something that can't be addressed by sharing and voting in the tool, you're their POC. Our friends, our president, our vice president of membership don't have the time and capacity for every woman in the chapter to come to them. So you get to be the voice of that chapter. You also know your class well, right? So I would assume my sophomores understand what those hardships are of a sophomore. You're coming to that invitations committee with that perspective to apply to potential new members. What do those sophomores in general need, right? Maybe our junior class, we're struggling with our GPA, and that's a big thing that you guys want to focus on. So thinking about those, and each of you bringing your unique perspective to it, is incredibly important. And that's why we go through and figure out who those different folks are. So obviously we won't go over these, all of them, but the big parts about being a part of a committee, the first and foremost is confidentiality. So what we don't want is for you all to share anything that is talked in this meeting. That's not because we're saying ugly things, because that's actually on the contrary. If we have said things that we don't want to be shared because they were mean, we've already messed up. but it's because it's a part of a membership selection process, and understanding that just because someone is a good woman doesn't mean that they're a good Delta Zeta woman. And being able to discern that will be very important in the bigger process for you all as invitations committees to really figure out. So I know I'm spewing a lot really fast. Any comments, questions, concerns so far? Awesome. So we can go through these really quickly, but it's have a great judge of character, good at the 30-second meet and greet. So this one will be really important. So when you all create bump groups, none of you should be in a bump group if we can help it. You guys are a successful enough chapter with enough women that you should be able to handle that, because your ability to go bump in and bump out of conversations. So maybe on the first day, a little less strategic, but that's where you will have the ability to really dive in. So maybe at an invitations committee meeting, you have gone through the list of women and there's somebody really on the cusp. We can't get a feel of them. Your ability to bump into a conversation and chat with them quickly and discern good, bad, ugly, or in between of how that conversation went and what value that woman might bring to the chapter. So that's really your ability to perfect and what are those things that are important. So think about that again when we take it back to what is the perfect Xi Beta woman, what makes her the perfect candidate to join the chapter, figuring out your ability to discern that and quickly meet people. Does that make sense? I know that that's a heavy weight that you guys have, but it's an important one, and you have the ability to cross compare with all the people you meet. With no comments, I'll take that as you guys get it. I would recommend that you guys go through and review all of these. These are good practices of just being a good Delta Zeta, being good with time, being good with your commitment, meeting deadlines, but review all of these. Here's a little bit about the responsibilities and best practices of the invitation committee. So obviously you're going to be keeping up with the forms and all of the minutia of operating the committee. So I would review that. Not as critically important because we have an incredible vice president membership and president who will be handling a lot of this back end stuff, but making sure that we have all things considered and we're all pitching in to be a part of it. Again, it's in here twice because it's that important, is the confidentiality of this committee. And so that also includes things like making sure we've deleted anything that you have saved on your computer, that things aren't discussed in text messages, but in person. If someone misses a meeting, we don't record them. So I don't know, I know with Zoom conversations here a lot lately, we have the ability to record them, which is great, but we want to make sure that we're not recording anything that could be left behind later. I don't know, back in the Stone Age when there was no voting tool, when I was a Delta Zeta, we used what were called cards. I don't know if that's been phased out since you guys are here. Have you guys ever used paper voting? Great, then you don't even need to worry about it. But to give you a little scare of it, basically we had a card. Every potential new member who came in, every person that spoke to her wrote a card on her. They scored her, they ranked her just like the tool. And as you could probably imagine, in your chapter room or in your house or anywhere that you store all of your random Delta Zeta things, can you imagine if you came back 3 years later and found your potential new member cards? We don't ever want that. Right? Because your membership is special and valuable. So the same thing goes with digital. It's a lot easier to delete that. It's not something we're laying around. Now we'll go through a little bit of this. I know this has training, but I'm going to kind of freewheel it because I don't like doing anything by the book, but these are all here. These are the best things to go by. Most of this is what I have on here, but I like to break it down into a little bit different. So we've got the who, which we've covered is who is a part of it. We'll cover the process and what that should look like practically. The manual will walk you through it, but I like to talk through best practices of what does each night look like? Because correct me if I'm wrong, do any of you guys want to stay up till 4 a.m. and then have to go sing recruitment songs and then convince someone to join your sorority that you're exhausted? Anybody? Yeah, I don't think so, right? So let's talk through what those practical tips look like to execute a good invitations committee, and so you don't have to sleep all night. And then the last part, I would really break out into tips. So that's legacies, that's RFM, and then understanding snap bidding and the different technical terms of it. I am not one that's super particular about using the terms correctly. For some things I am, but for recruitment, I just want you to understand the term and to be able to think critically and make a decision. Whether you know the definition or not is not that important. And then the bigger piece of the why. So why and what woman are we going to recruit for our chapter, and why is she important? So we'll truck along a little bit through this, and then we'll get into the more practical things. So this is the process as the manual lays it out. So the first step is the members submit votes and comments on the chapter voting tool. That sounds much easier than it actually is in practice if you've used the tool before. So the biggest part of this is you all's invitation committee members, and we can do a whole nother training on this if you want, but there's pre-recorded trainings as well, is knowing the voting tool intimately. You are most certainly going to run into issues during recruitment. Your internet's going to go down. You're going to have issues with she doesn't pop up in the system. The vote didn't save. You need to be able to go ahead and think through what those problems are and how we would solve them, but making sure they submit them. So I've had chapters where the Wi-Fi goes down and they say that they have till 9 o'clock that night to submit the rest of their votes for the day, right? So what is that practical way we're going to get them to submit the votes? Next, we click into the voting tool and we download the scores from chapter voting tool into Excel. Do I have any ladies who are very familiar or handy with Excel? All right, perfect. We love that we have advisors who are good at that. Do any of you all in any classes or anything that would require any expertise in Excel? Just the unsolicited life advice, hack and tip, I would get to know Excel for the most part in the business world in my grown adult life. I have excelled because I have learned and suffered through Excel courses. So maybe even go online and find a Wiz class, something free, easy, that will also help in Delta Theta, because your ability to move quickly through an Excel, knowing how to sort, how to color code, and all of those different features will really help you all move through this. So it sounds silly and it sounds like a lot of extra work, but I can guarantee you the payoff will be well beyond Delta Theta when you get into the role. I see Stacy just nod that head. So it is. So when we download that, we sort the data and use conditional formatting. Super vague. Easier said than done, and we can pull that up, but when we're sorting it, that's where it comes down to you all to figure out as a chapter, what are our priorities? An easy one is to always sort by grades. I will caution you here, a grade does not discern that woman's value or her worth. Obviously, we have our GPA requirement, so we'll always release the women who don't meet our grade GPA, but I would never recommend that we sort women and keep or release them based on our GPA after that. Does that make sense? Yeah, so when we're sorting and making sure that that's something, we do want to look at their voting. We want to look at their overall rating. I don't know if this is you all as a chapter, do you guys use all 5 numbers in the voting tool? Great. I have some chapters that tell their women only to use 1, 3s, and 5s. We want to use 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Does that make sense?
Sometimes I've heard that we're not really supposed to use 3, but
that's a great, yeah, good feedback. So the easy option to pick is a 3. If she wasn't terrible, she's not a 1, so, but she's also not a 5, we'll put her as a 3. And that's where I would challenge you guys as we really figure out who's the perfect Psi Beta woman, right? What we need to do is maybe start assigning that scale. So we sit down with a chapter and have a chapter workshop. As a 5, list out all the qualities that she should have, right? As a 4, some of them. As a 3, as a 2, and as a 1. So it makes it easier for us to really discern who's a 1, who's a 5, who's a 3. And that has everything to do with us really articulating who that 3 might be. If we avoid it, we're just going to get a lot of 2s and 4s that still average out to a 3. That makes sense. So really assign who is a 3, who's a 4, who's a 5. Is that someone who's active in their community and on campus? So really thinking those out. Awesome. Also using conditional formatting is thinking about the pre-score. Have you guys historically used the pre-score in the voting tool?
yes, I think so.
I think whenever we pre-score, it's just invitation committee that pre-scores, like the nobody else, I don't think.
Right. So when you all go in, you'll have the opportunity to pre-score all of the women. Sometimes chapters don't have the data from their university yet with all the women that are going through recruitment with enough time. But if you do, I would really challenge you to utilize that pre-score and think about those, those factors that are most important. So in your pre-score, you're going to want to ensure that we take into account their academics, but that will be taken care of with the women that'll be released. Do they have extracurricular activities? Is there some kind of connection to the chapter? Is she maybe a sophomore or a junior and we know more about her, that maybe she has a reputation on campus? Really outlay all of those important things, the application, but also take into account, you can weight the percentages of the pre-score, because how important is something before we've even met a woman, right? Does that make sense? But really just, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. With talking on this topic, I've been like sitting and debating over the past couple of weeks on like what percentage I want to set my pre-scoring at. What do you recommend as far as a percentage to actually set it at?
An average is usually about 5%. But what I will, and this is where it varies from campus to campus, some chapters and some universities really encourage their potential members to fill out that form, where on Campus Recruiter, ICS, or whatever system you use, they'll ask them 5 or 10 questions and they submit paragraphs, they submit true answers, versus where there are universities where half the women don't fill it out. It's less involved. They give maybe 2 or 3 answers. So if you have a campus that really gives a lot of information, I would weight that higher. If you're a campus where they don't give a whole lot of information, I would weight that lower. I wouldn't weight it so high that it counts against the woman. How many of you had a clue when you were going through recruitment what you were doing, right? Well, yeah, I see the heads nodding, right? What we don't want to do is discourage a woman who maybe had no clue what recruitment is and no clue that this was her application. Like this was her first introduction to the chapter, that weights her lower because she might be a stellar woman. So take all those things into account. For the most part, you get a lot of great, solid feedback on those forms, and that's generally the consensus. Do you guys know, I think Anna, you said you had done it before, and what does it normally look like for you all as a campus?
Usually it's just 1 to 5, right? For the pre-score.
Yes, there's a weighted percentage, but as far as like the university, do you all get an application from the university when the potential member applies to be in recruitment?
Yes.
Are those answers that they provide, do they encourage the women to give good solid answers, or is it just something that they just answer?
I think just something they just answer. Like it's not a whole lot of information, you know?
Okay.
I've
Well,
actually been getting them and they have like, I mean, it's very slim to none. Like
okay.
it asks them like involvement and they have like one thing, like, I don't know, which is very, very short and sweet.
If that's the standard, then I would say you could probably weight it a lower average because there's not a whole lot to go off of. There is something a lot of chapters do, which I would probably discourage. Chapters will go in and Facebook stalk every one of the women. I would challenge you not to do that. Someone's social persona is not exactly who is always true, right? Like you can check out my social media. That's only a small facet of who I am as a human being. So I would be very careful with that. I would also challenge you as diversity, equity, and inclusion are becoming very big players in higher education, and most especially sororities and fraternities, and especially in the way of recruitment. If there's a picture, try not to look at it, discourage you from that. Do you like her as a human being for that pre-score? Granted, it's only 5% of their overall score, so you don't need to get too wrapped up in it, but those are things to consider. Does that make sense, or any concerns with that?
And is it just me and Sydney that does the pre-scoring, or is it the whole invitation committee that's utilized? How does that work?
Yeah, so it depends on how you all want to do it. How many women do you guys normally have registered for recruitment every year?
I can't remember. Callie, do you know?
It's like, it just depends. I don't know about with COVID and everything, like what's changed, but around 200 normally.
Okay, 200 is a sizable amount. Sometimes chapters will all sit together, or it'll be a requirement that everyone reviews it and you all decide on a score. That's a little bit more time intensive. Sometimes I've worked with chapters that divide up the list. So 200 divided by 1, 2, 3, 4. We're missing 2 other women, 5 or 6 of you. Not as many to divide it up that way. It's whatever you all's preference is. But what I would caution you as you divide them up is to be very careful that you have a clear picture of what's a 5, what's a 4, what's a 3, and what's a 2, and what's a 1. Otherwise, a 5 to you and a 1 to somebody else can be totally different. So making sure you're doing those. Some chapters opt not to do a pre-score at all. So if you guys start to get into the weeds, or if there's really no information on that woman and you don't think that that's worthwhile, don't pre-score them. right? If the stuff we're getting is garbage and that's pretty much the theme across the board, don't worry about pre-scoring. It won't matter. It's a lot of time that you've wasted. And I think that's the biggest part, is you guys understanding and trusting the process, because it does work out the way it's supposed to, if that's helpful. Perfect. The next is really going into the weeds of how we execute a list, and we'll go through that in a little bit. I love recruitment because of the strategy. So have any women who love strategy, like gameplay and all that fun kind of thing? Do you have any business majors? Nope. Okay, great. Well, we will dive into some of that, and I'll just geek out and nerd out myself. But there's a way to be strategic. So I'm sure you guys know recruitment is who you pick versus who they pick. And what we want to do is be strategic so that they pick you and you pick them. You guys are aware of that premise thus far, yeah? Great. So we'll talk through carry figures, who's on the bubble, comments, legacies, preparing flex lists, and submitting invitations. So that's a big part. So we'll lump that all into strategy, and we'll visit that in a bit. And then when you submit the invitations, and preparing for the next week. So the best and biggest part that I enjoy most about recruitment, and when I was head of invitations, when I was a young collegian, way back when, it was the part about the strategy after the fact. So you guys have narrowed down your list. You've decided who you love, and each night you're going to find that you're going to find women that you have a rush crush, that you have developed, who is the best. You're going to find that there are a lot of women middle of the road and you have no idea. This is where the strategy of you all, as far as post invitation meeting, really dive in. So when you submit your list, it is not over. That is where it's just getting started. So you all know your bump groups. I would be very strategic when you're forming these bump groups. You don't put all of your strong recruiters together, and you don't put all of your weak recruiters together. You need to have diverse groups that have different levels of recruiting strength, but also diverse in their groups and in their interest. So it is nice often when we have groups that are similar in the fact that it's easy to bump from one person to the next for them to be able to understand and make that segue. But what's really important is that they get to see all facets. So I will use an example from my collegiate time. I'm sure, as you can tell, I am Delta Zeta through and through. I bleed pink and green. I am excited, preppy, positive, happy little sorority girl, like breathe glitter, right? So paint that picture. That's who I am. That's who I was as a young collegian. As a part of my chapter, a good friend of mine, her name was Flo, right? She had long hair. She didn't wear any makeup. She was in a t-shirt all the time, not in the little pink dress, right? A part of the same chapter. Flo and Brett are two very different people, but we were always in a bump group together because what Flo got out of a conversation was going to be very different than what Brett got out of the conversation. So when we got to our matching, when we got to pairing and figuring out who will talk to each other, having them have that opportunity. And I'm sure you guys have women in your chapter just the same that are really varying in how they operate and how they're just different. And I think that's the best part about sorority. It gives us, one, the opportunity to demonstrate that, but then two, Flo is going to vote very different than Brett is going to vote, right? So having that opportunity to really see what our chapter thinks about a woman. Sorry, my Apple Watch keeps listening to all my calls tonight and popping in. So anyways, does that make sense? So that's the big part. So that will be what's important for you guys post recruit or post submitting your list, is figuring out who's a priority for you. Maybe you guys have found your rush crush. We found our legacies. We've found those women that are incredibly important. We know that she might mesh really well with Flo. We're going to go ahead and pair her with Flo for that next day. So that pairing and matching is also your responsibility, and making sure that you have them ready for the next day. Does that make sense? Have you guys had any experience with matching and pairing?
I think just Anna and I think Stacey, you've worked with recruitment before, haven't you?
Yeah, just a little bit last year. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well, maybe we can do, I know I keep saying more trainings, but to be honest, you could spend days and days and days training and learning through recruitment. But on a high level, pairing the next day is what potential new member should talk to which member. You should always try and have them have a diverse group. Look back and save me that information of who spoke to her last night, and that's the next person, a different bump group you put her in to get a different feel of the chapter, if that makes sense. But that's your opportunity to really prepare for that. But what you also get, you all have the ability to float. So maybe Sally Sue is priority number one for the Xi Beta chapter to really recruit. Maybe that's where Anna, you pop in and, hi, I'm chapter president. And I'm sure you've introduced at the beginning, right? And one makes that woman feel very special, but it also gives her the opportunity for you to really get to feel her out. And all of you can do that as a member of the invitations committee. You can say, hey, I'm a part of the recruitment committee. They won't understand what invitations is, but if you say recruitment committee, they understand that you're someone important and they're excited. And you can always come up, I've heard such great things about you, right? Because we're complimenting the PNM, they're excited. But then to dive into that conversation. So maybe what we wanted to discern, you guys saw a lot in the comments that Sally Sue was rude, but she's getting great scores. You jump into that conversation and see how it's going and get a feel, but you guys can have a strategy. So what I would do is divide and conquer of your list. Who are your priorities and who do we need a better feel on? So maybe there's somebody who's 3 across the board. She's just so. Do we want to keep her? Do we need to release her? We need a better picture. And that's where you guys go in and be strategic that next day and really figure that out. So what I would do at the end of every night, you have your list that you've submitted. I would pull several of those that are priorities to you all, but then also pull those that are middle of the roads that you need a better discernment of. Maybe there's a woman that's gone through the first 2 nights of recruitment and she's got all 5s and all 1s, right? Somewhere our chapter isn't jiving, and it's your responsibility to figure out why and make that call on that woman. So I would make a list and divide and conquer between the 5 of you all, decide who bumps into that conversation and gets that feel for that woman. So like Anna might have a list of 5 women each party that she needs to bump into those conversations and make a call on. So when you guys get to that conversation that next night, Anna can definitively say, nope, this one isn't for us, right? Or yes, she is as spectacular as we think. I've made her love us and she's going to join Delta Zeta. Does that make sense as far as what you do the next night or once you've submitted the list? Because it doesn't end once we've submitted the list. Am I overwhelming anyone? I'm seeing a couple blank stares. Okay. Is anyone excited by this?
Yes, I can't even explain. Like, it has helped so much.
Good. Is anybody terrified?
I will say this is really good because I've been on invitation committee for a long time and we've never had anything like this. So I'm learning stuff that I maybe didn't even know. So
Perfect.
awesome.
And there's a lot to cover. Again, I know I keep saying more trainings, but if you can hang tight and you're like loving this, we'll jump on another call. I'm happy to do it. So that's the whole strategy. But now let's get into the weeds of what each night should look like and a little bit more of the strategy. And this is where I will geek out. So we'll move through a little bit of this, but some of our hints are understanding a legacy. And these are just the things you have to know. There's a whole thing about legacy policies, but it's also here, and I'll just high level, anyone that we can confirm with national headquarters that her mother, the mother, daughter, granddaughter, directly related, we don't do cousins, aunts, as a standing member of Delta Zeta. So someone who left in good standing. So Stacy and we left in good standing, right? So if we have daughters, they can become a Delta Zeta, if that makes sense. And here's the thing about Delta Zeta, that we have continued to evolve our legacy policy that hasn't always been the same. They must be considered through the introduction form. So they might say, so Stacy's daughter goes through recruitment. If Stacy does not submit that recruitment introduction form, we do not have to count her daughter as a legacy. Does that make sense? So she might tell you she's a legacy, but if you never received a form, you don't have to honor that. If you don't like her, fine. Should we consider our legacies? Absolutely. She still has to have a 2.7 GPA regardless of if she's a legacy or not. That's a basic baseline membership. She has to be invited to at least formal recruitment event. So provided she meets the GPA. So that basically means that first night of recruitment, she has to come. But if you don't like her, we'll invite her one more time. And after that, no more. You have to invite her. So that would technically be your second day. Remind me how many rounds you guys have, 3 or 4?
There's 2 days of open house and then philanthropy and then pref.
Okay, great. So she has to be invited to philanthropy. She doesn't always have to be invited to pref. Now, I will tell you, if she gets invited to pref, she has to go to the very top of your bid list, but we'll talk about what a bid list is in a bit. And if we get into those predicaments, legacies live in a land of their own. And if I'm speaking very candidly with you all, national organizations have recently, most of them have gotten rid of their legacy policy in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are absolving them because they're a barrier to membership. I don't know Delta Theta's intention and the long-term plans to have it, but it is very possible that in your Delta Theta time, you will see it go away. So whether that's this recruitment or not, it could be a thing that no one has to worry about. You do have to have the CCD or the RCD if you don't have a CCD, but thank goodness you got Stacy. And you have to consult with the director or the RCD or the recruitment chairwoman about releasing a legacy, but we can walk you through that policy. That's a little bit about it. We talked about how she must be on the top of the bid list if she is brought to preference. Any questions about that?
I know I have a couple good friends that are in other sororities that are also the same position, that there's girls that like, if they come in open-minded and don't want to, tell the chapter that they're a legacy so they get a feel for other chapters, and say that we're aware just from word of mouth, should we approach that member in a different way, letting her know that we know she's a legacy, but we don't know that she's a legacy?
Nope, unless she declares it, I wouldn't worry about it. If she's put it down, sometimes the university will have that form, or if she has an interest form, check with her, ask her and say, hey, we know you're Delta Theta. So that might also be a really good one on the first round, because you all for that first night won't have a whole lot of information of what conversations to bump into. So maybe it's anyone who self-identifies via their form they've submitted via the university or via an introductory form on the Delta Theta side. That's where you all can divide and conquer in each party of, hey, I hear your Delta Theta legacy, or we saw it listed X, if that makes sense. But you don't have to consider them any special way. They're still a member who's vying for a spot in your membership. Does that help? Perfect. References are one. I know chapters in the South, they're all a little bit different, but it's an introduction form. So maybe I have a friend or a cousin or a friend of a friend who's going through sorority recruitment. I know she's an awesome human. I'm a Delta Theta alum, and I can write that introduction form. You don't have to treat them any specific way, but for a lot of chapters, that's important. Also, in candidness, a lot of national sororities are getting rid of this. Again, another barrier to entry. So I'm sure you guys know universities like the University of Alabama and other huge universities, you basically have to have an introduction letter to even go through any round of recruitment. So there are women that are scrambling to get letters to 10 different chapters, if that makes sense. So that's a quick one. We won't spend too much time on it. And now we'll dive into the fun stuff of understanding the strategy at night of each list. So go with me. Some of you guys have done it. You have finished a whole round of recruitment. You're exhausted. Hopefully you're going to get something to eat, and you guys are going to sit down as a team. You've now exported all of your lists and you've sorted it. I always recommend the first night we'll sort it by GPA, and this is where your Excel will help you. And I'm happy to give you guys a crash course, but we'll identify this women we want to release, and we place them on a separate tab of our spreadsheet. You'll get numbers of how many to release and how many to keep. It's called release figure methodology. And this is where I'm going to geek out on you hardcore. So this is the science behind recruitment. They say there's the process. You can cheat the process. And by cheat, it just means you've learned how the science works. So you, Delta Zeta, have 200 women that go through recruitment. You have your favorite woman that you ranked first, and you have your woman you rank 200th, your least favorite, right? Every single potential member that goes through, remind me how many chapters we have on campus?
7, I think.
7.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they essentially rank for the most part. So they may be told to release 3. So they won't necessarily rank all of them in 7, but they'll be told how many to release. But in their minds, Delta Theta is going to fall in a ranking anywhere from 1 to 7. We want the women who are at the top of our list for them to have us at the top, right? So that's figuring out the right magic to make that happen. Here's where you can be very good at RFM and have a very good RFM score, but you might not recruit the woman you think you would. So think about a chapter that maybe you would stereotypically think might be recruiting at the bottom, right? But they have a chapter that really jives. There's some of our women that are a little bit more unique, a little bit more niche, right? And I'm sure we have chapters on our campus there that are very like that. They know who wants them. So for Delta Zeta, it might be the women at the bottom of our list. They might still have us at the top, but if we pick the women at the bottom also want us, you can still have a high score. It has nothing to do with a potential member being high or low on that list. It has everything to do with the same women you have on your list wanting you. Does that make sense? It has nothing to do with a good or bad PNM. It has everything to do with your strategy of capturing the women that want you. And that's where we do a really good job of outlining who Delta Zeta is, and then who Xi Beta is, and then who does Xi Beta want. Because what we end up, if all, remind me how many women are in our chapter, 100-ish, right?
Like 83 maybe.
Okay, so if all 83 of our chapter women go out and they all have a different idea of Xi Beta, what's going to happen is we're recruiting different women, that they want someone who's here, someone who's there, someone's all over the place, but we have a solid core of who she is. Those women are going to want us too. That makes sense. So RFM is essentially the method and the numbers of which you align to those women. So your ability to pick the people that want you. And it scores anywhere from 0.0001 to 0.9. Most chapters live somewhere about 0.5 to 0.8. And that's where we want to be. So that will never matter to you all. But here's how we get really into it. And it's our ability to place them on the list and understanding what some of these strategies are. So the first one is finding the right woman. We put the women at the top of our list that matter, that want us. So here's the thing. Maybe Sally Sue, this potential new member, every chapter wants her and she's great. But we've heard maybe she really wants Alpha Phi. Do we have Alpha Phi on that campus? No, great. Then that's a perfect example, right? She wants Alpha Phi really bad. She's probably been disinterested into our parties. She hasn't really engaged with our women and she's been really rude, but for whatever reason, we still like her. That would not be strategic of us for her to put her high on our list because she doesn't want us. She has sent us all the clues that she doesn't want us. That's a waste of our opportunity versus maybe somebody who's middle of the road, but we like her. The chapter gets along well with her. She's indicated she loves Delta Zeta. That's important. We could put her higher up. That's how we maximize our RFM. Does that make sense? Awesome. So each night you're going to get a number of women to release. And this is where RFM comes in. So every chapter has one of those scores, whether it's 0.0001 or 0.9. You want a higher score. Every chapter currently has one of those numbers. It's not something you will ever know. It lives in a spreadsheet, and essentially each chapter is given a number of women to release based on that, because the science is a stronger recruiting chapter, more women want them. Therefore, you can release more because the odds are in your favor. So I'm sure you guys have a chapter on your campus that's probably struggling, right? It's a struggling chapter, which means less women want them. They have to keep more women in their pool because the odds don't work for them to reach total. Does that make sense? So I'm sure you guys have chapters that they release everyone on the first night. And then I'm sure you have chapters that get to release nobody throughout the process. Have you guys heard that as you've gone through recruitment? And it's everything to do with your relative recruiting strength. And that has everything to define the RFM. So getting the opportunity to release women is a great thing. So you should see that as a win. So if you're like, how the heck are we going to cut 100 women? That means you guys are recruiting at a high strength. However, if you only get to cut 5 women, that would probably be an indicator that we struggled that night to recruit. So you guys can use those as indicators of how you're doing and how women are seeing. So if you got a high release number, that's a great thing. That's a great indicator that your women are killing it and they're having great conversations each night. If you get a flex plus, or you have to add women, or you can't release any, that means you might be struggling. And that's an opportunity for us to kind of reevaluate. Obviously, we can't throw all of these workshops in the middle of the recruitment, but it gives us an idea to figure out maybe what's going wrong and how to course correct. So a little bit about these release. You will decide. So there are 200 going through recruitment. The first night you may get to release 50 women. You'll pick the 50 that you'd like released. So essentially here's our list of 200. Our 150 are here and our other 50 are here. And you will sort those and go through them. What I wouldn't do is go through every single 200 women, right? We're going to filter and sort all of our women. So we found whatever our scores are. We've removed the women already that are academics. So we find everybody that's a 2.7, we put them down in those 50. Those must go first. After that, we sort by the numbers. So whoever has a 5 and whoever has a 1, and we'll look at that. And you just see where that bar falls. So we have all 200 women sorted. Our academic releases at the bottom. These are women that are sorted by the overall cumulative score. They're sitting on 1s, maybe some 2s. We got a 3s, a 4s, or 5s. 5s, we don't need to worry about. That's not a conversation until after we've submitted the list. 4s, not a conversation until it's after submitted the list. Find where that line hits, that natural break of, again, we're going with the arbitrary number of 50. Find where that list is. Look up and look below. Is there anybody that for whatever reason might have been a fluke that scored 1 that we need to move above? Is there anybody that scored above that line that might have been a fluke that needs to go below? Does that make sense? Those are the biggest things when we're identifying our list, and that we waste a lot of time is going through all the women. Our 5s are 5s, don't worry about it. There is worthwhile to spot check. So maybe Sally Sue went through, she had some great conversations, but our women weren't aware. Maybe she had an MIP in the past, and that is something that's a red flag to us, right? Worth discussing, but she's sitting at a 5. We should probably leave her there unless there's some major moral objection that we need to release her. Does that make sense? So did you guys used to in the past go through all of the women?
When I was on invitation the first time, I'm pretty sure we did.
Yeah, was that exhausting?
Oh yeah,
Was that productive?
no,
Yeah.
a bunch of talking and wasting time.
Yep. That's where I love the math and the strategy of it, is that we really probably only have roughly 20 women you should ever really speak about it at night. So again, our arbitrary line, the release number of 50, 50 on the bottom, the other 150 up top. Again, here's where your flex minus and flex plus. So they give you relative recruiting strength, but it improves each night. So you got a release of 50. They'll tell you have a flex minus of 10, a flex plus of 10. And this is where you can really know that next morning how many people aligned with you. Flex minus is you're actually improving from where you did last year. If you utilize your flex minus, that means that your relative recruiting strength, that 0.001 to 0.9 number went up. That means whatever you're doing statistically, you're recruiting better and more women want you. That means we're going to release more. So say you have a flex minus list of a 10. So that means flex off this one, this one, this one. So we're sitting at 150, all of a sudden you 149, 148, 147. So those women, who do you want to release first? And those numbers should fall in order, but what you're realistically going to have is a bunch of 1s and a bunch of 2s. What you want to do is order those 2s, order those 1s that are on there. There's also a flex plus list. So maybe for whatever reason, we really struggled. Our recruitment video just tanked, right? Like for whatever reason, maybe there was no audio and it just didn't play, right? It hurt our chapter. Our relative recruiting strength will drop. We'll flex add because the odds are not in our favor. And we need more women at our parties to maximize our probability of reaching chapter total. Does that make sense? And I know I'm throwing a lot of words at you, but that flex plus is where it indicates to us that our relative recruiting strength has dropped, but because it's all a numbers game and a probability game of how many you'll end up with to hit that total at the end, they add more to your parties. Here's where I'll challenge you and our Delta Theta philosophy has changed. Our flex plus lists are often, you can look at it as we're adding the best of the worst, right? So if you have to add back a 1, which one would you want to add back first? As where the flex minus is, it's the worst of the best. If you have to remove someone good, who would you remove first? So think about it in that way. But in Delta Theta world, a chapter who is a low recruiting chapter, which is not you all, will often have only flex plus and no flex minus. And that indicates that you are low recruiting, we want to up those numbers, but the last thing we want in Delta Theta, and where we've really changed our philosophy over the years, is we don't add women back into the chapter that you don't want in your chapter. right? Sally Sue is heinous. Maybe those numbers tell you that you have to have that many. What we're not going to do is force you to have that many. If she doesn't fit, she doesn't fit. And that's where you guys have to be really intentional. Sometimes you can make the option not to use that Flex Plus list. Sometimes we can under invite or over invite. I will not get into details of those because I don't want you to do anything crazy. You guys are a pretty solid chapter, but you have the option to under invite. So working with a chapter that is struggling, I would allow them to under invite, which means say of our 200, they have to keep 200 or they have to keep 180, right? Only 20 women they could release. Maybe 20 of those 200 women had bad grades, but they have to keep the crazy chick. They have to keep the girl with drug charge and things like that. And you're like, I don't want that in Delta Zeta, right? But they're only allowed to release 20. The ability to under invite will say, no, they don't meet our Delta Zeta standards, and you can under invite and not invite them back. By not adding a Flex Plus, and that's where it's really important. If you're going to under invite, you never have a Flex Plus because they will just get added back. Same thing with the Flex Minus. You always want to submit a Flex Minus because that always means you're improving. You do not always want to submit a Flex Plus, but that's a real complicated issue that we can get into when the time being comes, and you guys will have an RFM specialist that's assigned to you all. So that's a little bit of the strategy into it, and a little bit more of the numbers of like, we really aren't talking about more than maybe 20 women a night, and really challenging those conversations to be based on what value does she add to the chapter? What were those red flags? What I would also be careful, and I'm sure maybe Anna, you've seen this, is that we'll read the comments of the woman who talked to her, and we might not like the woman who gave that comment. So we will either wait or not weight that comment or that score differently. So really keeping into account that all scores are equal. All members of our chapter are members of our chapter. Maybe someone's not a strong recruiter, so we feel that vote is less worthy. That's not the case. And that's where it's incredibly important when we create our bump groups that we have the varying levels of strength of recruitment so that we'll even out what that score might be. Does that make sense? So I know I went through all of that really quick. We have about 5 minutes. We'll go through a little bit of this. The bid list is essentially the one you submit at the end. So we've made it to preference. Everyone goes on your bid list. If they come to your preference, it's essentially a whole ranking order. The only people that get moved to the top are your legacies. And if you've had someone who's remained for grades by that point, we've already messed up. But essentially, we just rank that at the bottom. Does that make sense? That's pretty self-explanatory, and that one's easy. And again, we can have a conversation about that, but I'm not worried for you all. Here's the last two pieces. There's called snap bidding and CO being. Have you guys ever heard of either of those? Yes. This is where I am not peculiar about what terms you want to use. Some people are. So snap bidding is technically only that time between when you get your list and when bid day begins. CO being is anytime after that. So you guys generally always make quota. So quota is the arbitrary number that they set for that potential new member class. I don't think you guys have not made quota in some years, and you guys usually get quota plus, which is a whole other RFN thing we can get into the weeds about later, but quota plus are great. So you guys don't need to worry about snap bidding, but it was essentially if you didn't, so if quota is 40 and you guys only matched with 30 women, you could provide a snap bid, it's what it's called, to get up to that 40 number prior to the starting of bid day. So that makes sense. I don't think that'll apply to you all at all. Great. And then the last one is continuous open bidding. I'm sure you guys have done that. I'm sure you've probably done it this semester. And this is where it's important and that we be prepared. So recruitment, yes, it's in the fall, but it is all year long. And here's the thing. Again, this won't apply to you all quite as much because you're a little bit stronger chapter in recruitment, but say for whatever reason, we decide to under invite. We're a chapter that's weaker. We did not want the women with the drug charges. We didn't want crazy Sally Sue, and we didn't want those grades. If you under invite, you're at risk of not reaching quota. You need to be prepared to COB. And maybe you'll snap bid some of them, but if after the point you haven't met quota, or maybe you have met quota, and this is where people get confused, that there's two different numbers that are very big, quota and total. So quota is the number of new members that you recruit in a defined period. Total is the chapter total size, and those chapter totals are determined a little bit different on every campus, but essentially at the end of the day, it's an average or a number of all where every chapter should aim to be. If we meet quota and we do very well, but we readjust total and we fall below total, you'll need to COB up to total. It's a responsibility of every Delta State chapter to have full membership at all times. And we utilize and we get to that place using COB. So I know I flew through all of that and get into the real technicals, but that's the big overarching picture that you guys need to know and understand. Things like COB are only things that we would cover if we're at risk, because we didn't utilize the strategy of RFM and the invitations committee. So what comments, questions, concerns do you guys have? And I know I'm cutting it close on time, but I would love to chat through anything you guys have concerns on and maybe hear about what we want to cover next if you guys are interested.
I think that was really helpful. The flex, minus, and plus list has always kind of confused me, but that really helped a lot. So I really appreciate it.
Of course.
I also think it's very beneficial, you know, what Anna said in the past, that they've discussed every single girl. And I feel like in the past, people have not wanted to be a part of the invitation committee because, yes, you recruit all day long, you do this stuff, and then you stay up till 4 a.m. Like, that's like the vision of it. So if you only focus on 20 girls, like you said, we won't be up till 5 a.m. So
no, and to be honest, we've done it wrong if we stay up till 5 a.m. I've worked with Auburn University, who has like 1,500 women go through recruitment. Never stay up till 4 a.m. once. What are your concerns? Anybody like, I'm not sure about that, or like, this is where we're gonna go awry, or anybody just like exhausted by hearing me talk at you the whole time, less interactive than I had planned? Awesome. So what I would challenge you to do is go into that resources section and really dive into and look at those. Again, no one's going to quiz you. You do not need to memorize a darn thing, but just make yourself familiar with those. I would say if the voting tool is a point of contention, go in and look at that. I would really dive into it. They have parts about how our members should use it, but then they also have sections on how you all as invitation members should utilize it, because the better you are at operating and navigating it, that will also prevent you from staying up until 4 a.m. Right. If you waste that time trying to figure out how to use that Excel sheet and how to export it, we wasted 30 minutes just trying to export our list, you might be up till 4 a.m. So I would do some practice runs. What you guys can do, the data should be deleted, but you can make a few input 20 fake members and make your own, right? Give yourself a Flux Plus list of 4, a Flux Minus list of 2, and really walk through that and see what that looks like and following on the list. You will be tempted to want to talk about all the women. What I would not do is talk about this woman. Put your line and talk up and below. Anybody who lives up here or down there, not worth your time. Spot check it. But then what I'd also caution you against, a lot of chapters love to do this, and I'm sure you've done it, is, oh, I don't remember that one. And you clicky clack on Facebook or Instagram, and I guess Facebook isn't the thing anymore. I'm showing myself looking old. But those aren't the things that we want to visit. That's not where we want to go. We want to use our comments and we want to use our question or our scores. So comments, questions, concerns.
I think everything that you said was very helpful.
Good. Is there anything that you guys want to touch more on, or you just need a minute to sit and process?
How does everybody feel about like the math? Like the Excel sheet, just all of that?
I feel like once you see it, it'll make a lot more sense. So maybe we should do, you know, a mock Excel sheet and kind of work with it and stuff.
absolutely. Also, I have the first 43 that have signed up. So, you know, we could even jump on and, you know, start pre-ranking and stuff. So you can also do that at the same time. So
Yeah, if you guys want to take like a handful of those, because that will be great. You can even put in fake scores and for 3 rounds and go through it and really play with that tool and then clear it out and re-put them in when it's time to go. Awesome.
I think we should.
With that, oops, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that we should do like a chapter-wide voting tool, like send in the comments of these like fake girls that we make up, type deal. And then that way we can see it on their end and our end too.
Didn't something happen last year and we had to end up writing all of our comments?
yeah, we had to put them on an Excel sheet that was shared with the entire chapter, and everybody saw their comments.
yeah, that was
there,
awful.
and it was a hot mess.
Honestly, I remember that happening every year that I've done recruitment. Like a lot of scores don't say,
Yeah.
and so they've had to write them. or we've had to write them. in a
So
note.
let's build this in to whether it's our perfecting week or if we have summer workshops, we spend a chunk of time playing with that tool. Even if you're only inputting 10 fake women, I know some people do like Beyonce, Britney Spears, like, you know, and then everybody, it's fun and they get to rank like what they like or their comments and really figure out what's going on with that tool. Awesome. Well, I won't keep asking for questions. I know I talked at you for a whole hour. I didn't plan to do that. But it seems like it's sunk in with some of you guys. So with that, I'm 3 minutes over my hour, but you guys have my contact information. I'm more than happy to jump on another Zoom, give any trainings, connect you guys with anybody we need to. I am your resource. Stacy has my number and you guys have it or can get it from her, but here to help you guys. I'll turn it back over to you, Stacy.
Thank you very much. This was very helpful for a non-recruitment person. So
Yeah. Recruitment is for everyone. They just don't know it yet.
yes, that's true. That's true. It's just learning the tools. But yeah, so you guys, I know Callie and Sydney and I are going to get together soon to talk about some workshop stuff so we can further that. But yeah, use the GroupMe, talk about this and anything else you want to learn. Yeah, we can schedule Brett back in here. So
Perfect. You guys have a good, of course. You guys have a good rest of your week.
You too.
thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.
See ya.
So.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.